Welcome to episode 7 of Why Not Read Alpha Flight with Chris and Tom, a podcast where we take your favorite series seriously. I'm Chris Baker.
And I'm Tom Flynn. We're going from the beginning and looking at what made Canada's premier superhero team work, what didn't work, and taking a romp through a lesser read but much loved realm of the 616. And let's get down to what we're here for, the origin of Northstar and Aurora.
That's right. This episode is going to be all twins all the time. And if you know anything about them, you know that we're in for a treat and touchy subjects. So we've brought an expert guest to help us not put our feet in our mouth, or at least to help us remove them with the minimum amount of pain. We have with us today veteran podcaster Sara Netzley. Yay!
Huzzah.
Hello.
So, Sara, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you holding our hands as we talk about some touchy things here. Can you describe for our listeners why we're asking you to be here today? What are your qualifications that you bring here?
I mean, I asked myself that as I read the issues you sent me. So
Don't we all? Every single time we sit down to record.
So there are a number of reasons I think you reached out to me. I am a college professor. I teach media and representation. I am a journalist and a TV writer. I freelance for Entertainment Weekly. I am a romance writer under Sarah Whitney. And so I deal with relationships and the sex and much more normal than what we're going to... Because also, I am Chris's sister, so I think there was a convenience or familiarity factor there. So that's...
Well, I already had your number.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I will see you at Thanksgiving regardless. So, I had to say yes.
Well, I'm sure that we're going to develop some type of family splitting argument over the course of this episode so that every Thanksgiving we can scream, "I'll see you in hell," and storm out. I look forward to it. It's going to be great.
I love the idea that the Thanksgiving... the conversation at the Thanksgiving table is going to be centered around Northstar and Aurora and their really bizarre dynamic and how much sex Aurora has or has not had with, I don't know, anyone. It's
going to be nonstop discussion of Sasquatch's dick. Sara, there's an earlier episode or issue where Aurora moves into the Jean-Marie persona in the middle of a battle, and Jean-Marie realizes that Aurora has been sleeping with Sasquatch, and there's this look of horror that spreads across her face. And I've decided that look of horror is Jean-Marie realizing that she has visceral sensory information about what Bigfoot's dick smells like.
I have to say, I did note he has that privacy flap of fur.
Thank God.
A very long privacy flap of fur. And I had a lot of questions about that.
Well, it's just like He-Man. They grow that fur so that it covers up everything for the sensors.
So long. It's so much fur.
Well, and his signature move is to jump out of a helicopter at the problem. And so when he's falling out of the helicopter, belly first, and wind resistance is pushing all the loincloth out of the way, he's just going in little Walt first into every battle.
You got to humiliate your enemies from the from the jump.
That is exactly what our friend, secret agent superhero linebacker Dr. Walter Langowski would do. You're right.
Establish dominance. But also, to get us moving in the episode and off of this particular track, I'm just going to wrap it up by saying that I know your mother, and the mental image of you two having this conversation while the turkey's getting carved is just, man, I'm going to be at my Thanksgiving table just laughing my ass off. And none of my family's really going to know why.
I'm going to have to build up a stash of Sasquatch memes to text both of you during Thanksgiving Day.
Oh, Christ.
Please do it across the table from me so we can try to maintain our composure while our mother, who... Nancy is a saint, says, "Are you laughing at me?" And we say, "No.
We're just happy to be here.
It's Sasquatch dick, Ma. It's fine." Does anybody want my comic credentials? Is that... Yeah,
do you have much background in comics? Or, you grew up and I had comics around, but I don't recall you picking them up.
My comic credentials were the posters you had on your bedroom wall in 1994. So there's a lot of X-Men in bright purple and yellow, as I recall.
Literally on the wall behind me as I'm recording, by the way, the same posters. Yeah.
Yes. So that was that. In 1999, I was a newspaper reporter in Illinois, Central Illinois, and a movie was coming out called X-Men. And I said to my editor, I think we should do a story. I was on the entertainment beat. And I think I should interview comic book store owners because this is a big deal. And my newspaper editor said, I don't know. It seems like I don't think it's, and I was like, trust me, the 23-year-old reporter. I think this is going to be, and they let me do it. And it was a great story. And the X-Men movie did okay in 1999.
I remember that you got a press kit from that movie and you gave it to me for my birthday that year. And I was so excited because it came with production stills and it was so cool. I still have it.
Before the internet, what we did to access pop culture. So I would say I've mostly approached comics through TV and movies. So I'm one of those fans, but I have read the biggies that have start and end. So your Watchmen, your Dark Knight Returns, Why the Last Man, Preacher. I've read those. I read some Jessica Jones, The Walking Dead before it was a TV show. And then I did some pop culture, like some TV spinoffs. I did Buffy comics and Firefly and things like that.
But not like the ongoing superhero soap opera stuff.
And so reading these Alpha Flight issues was eye-opening. I've not read these week to week where they're saying, see this issue for that, or this happened over here. So it was interesting to see how that worked to point people out. The only other thing I would say about my comic bona fides, the moment I realized the power of visual in storytelling like that was in Watchmen. And it was that scene where John Osterman becomes Dr. Manhattan. And it's just that shot. The light is taking me to pieces, right? Can you picture it?
Mm-hmm.
That is when I was like, God damn, that's comic books.
I mean, we can all picture it in our heads right now. Like that's a very powerful conveyance of info. Yeah.
That was just that is my comic history.
I mean, and that's really, I mean, you're pointing to the absolute power of a good comic. Is it isn't just frequently comics can be just words on a page with some images connected to it, and it's not much more than that. But when it actually is interacting in the right way, it becomes something much more powerful than simply the words, simply the images. That fusion of the two is really what I read the comics for more often than not.
And I think that's what John Byrne is bringing to these issues that we can recognize here is that there's more going on than just pictures and words, especially compared later on when we get to Bill Mantlow's run, where it does feel like the words and the pictures aren't really complementing each other. They're just sort of there.
And that is your Bill Mantlo quota for the episode.
All right. Yeah. No sense in suffering twice. Right, Tom? So we start this episode with the backup story in Alpha Flight number 9, A Stranger in My Mirror, written and drawn by John Byrne, colored by Andy Yankus, lettered by Michael Higgins, and edited by Denny O'Neil and Jim Shooter. We're going to slice and dice this a bit so we're not just reading comics out loud in some kind of really poorly done radio play. So, taking out the dramatic pacing and all that jazz, here's what's up with our favorite speedster twins.
Jean-Paul and Jean-Marie Bobier's parents were killed when they were very young. Jean-Paul was adopted by their mother's cousin's family, who were too poor to raise a girl.
I have so many questions.
They couldn't afford the pads and the curlers and wispy nightgowns, apparently.
The dowry, you have to provide, 3 cows and some land so someone will take her off your hands once she's
land, Shannon.
Well, and it's funny also because the family, in choosing the boy, probably chose the more difficult of the two children to actually deal with and raise.
Okay, look, no, hard disagree. They are both equally difficult, man. They are both fucking train wrecks.
I don't know that Jean-Marie becomes a train wreck the same way if she doesn't go where she goes.
Okay.
Also, Jean-Marie seemed to be pretty biddable for about 13 years at that school. So,
wow.
Biddable was, apologies to everybody, but I'm not wrong.
No, you're not wrong. I need to use that word more often. That's amazing.
On behalf of women everywhere, please do not.
Yeah, no, I'm quite aware that's a terrible idea, but
So, Jean-Paul's new adopted family was named the Martins, and they moved from wherever the Bobier family lived to northern Quebec and completely forgot about Jean-Marie, who was sent to live at the Madame Dupont's School for Girls in Laval, Quebec, which is not a real town.
This is an orphanage run by nuns who we are told are, quote, staunchly clinging to the harsh, cruel ways of another century, end quote. Jean-Marie endures the implied beatings and forced prayers until the age of 13, when she can take it no more and throws herself off the top of the tallest building in the school. Before striking the paving stones below, she takes flight and finds herself a mile above the school in the blink of an eye. So this is Jean-Marie. Her powers activating. She is a mutant. She's 13. Puberty is kicking in, and her powers are manifesting and did at just the right time, which is usually how it works out for the mutants.
Tom, Jean-Marie is having some changes in her body these days.
Indeed. And you can imagine how a school clinging to the old ways would react to a mutant.
Not just a mutant, but potentially a troublesome one, because, she's willing to try to kill herself here, and clearly things are not going well for her. She's probably been troublesome to them before in other ways. When you're podcasting about comic books, you mistake episodes and issues, and we have to stop ourselves every time. Later issues are going to establish that she is afraid of the dark because of being locked in closets and forced to pray for days at a time. So that doesn't come through in these issues, but it does give us that much of the implication of what's going on.
And I would also say, I thought this issue, with me not knowing anything that came before or after, gave a pretty good hint that it's more than just beatings. Right?
Yeah, it's very evocative.
You get a sense that there's a lot of different things that are happening. And clearly, whatever sends her to the roof it's probably not just one thing. So that's... Yeah, I thought it did a really nice job of underwriting that in a good way, as opposed to a lazy or I want more way. I thought it was really spare and well done.
Yeah, that's what I find Byrne does very well here, is sketching this out and giving us just enough to really imply a deep story without ever having to tell you that. Yeah, that's Northstar's whole story, right?
We'll get to him in a moment. It's Jean-Marie's time right now.
Well, one night, as Jean-Marie is feeling sorry for herself in front of a mirror, she hears a voice say, "Do not be afraid, Jean-Marie. I am your friend. I bring you a very special present. I bring you freedom."
So usually I'm the one that does the French accents, and part of the reason why is that Chris can't settle between a French or a German accent, so we get something kind of like Alsatian that is really unsettling.
I was waiting for him to say, Schnell, Jean-Marie.
This is what I'm saying, right? Oh, what if as Aurora she actually has a German accent, as Jean-Marie it's a French Canadian accent? Now that would be a twist. What a twist. So after hearing those words, she looks into the mirror and sees her face, but not really her face. It is her, but the hair is more glamorous and the face is more confident and looks less weary and haggard. We then cut to 3 days later, and a bedraggled Jean-Marie is stumbling back into the school wearing makeup, looking very confused. It is heavily implied that the head nun beats the ever-loving hell out of her following this event, and the narration says, quote, "Of the months and years that follow, little need to be said here," end quote.
So, how old is Jean-Marie here? We aren't told how much time has passed since she was 13 and got her powers. Can we be generous and say 16?
I think 16 is all right.
I mean, I have a 16-year-old.
Just say the next thing you're going to say, Chris, so we can get it out of the way.
16 makes me feel a little bit better about a kid disappearing for 3 days and just living a wanton lifestyle, but really, I don't feel good about it.
I'm just going to point out that at 16 is the age of consent in Quebec. And having looked that up, I am now going to burn my computer and walk away from this life forever. So this may be the last time you hear me on this podcast. We'll see.
I cannot say enough. Thank you for inviting me on to this episode, guys. Thank you.
That's what you're here for. Thank you. It's good to have friends, Sarah. And Tom, at least you had to look it up. You didn't just know it.
Oh, to be fair, I assumed 16 was the age of consent in Quebec. I just looked it up for confirmation because Quebec is, after all, the Kentucky of Canada.
Oh, Tom, dig up, stupid. I'm trying to give you an out, and you're like, nope. Totally knew it ahead of time. Just had to confirm.
Just gotta commit.
So 5 years pass after this incident, and Jean-Marie is nothing but a model student and demure girl in that time, enough so that the school offers her a teaching position, which Jean-Marie quickly accepts. So if she's done like a correspondence course or something to become a teacher, let's assume she's 21 when she gets her job, and that tracks with 16 for her incident, but...
I'm going to assume the school doesn't care about training or accreditation or ages or paperwork or whatever the Canadian version of Social Security numbers are. she's there and she does what she's told. And what is she teaching? What is her subject? What is there? I don't trust any of it. I trust none of it.
Yeah, nor should you. We've seen the level of education and treatment these kids get at this school, right? I get the feeling that she's very afraid of the outside world and trying to stay with what she knows. She's a traumatized kid who has never known anything outside these walls and the incredibly strict religious environment that she's in. And that can be very scary to step out of into a world that you've been told is evil and full of demons and trying to crush your everlasting soul.
Jean-Marie settles into her new room at the school and once again is visited by the mirror person saying, "You have a cold little room in a cold little school. Is that enough for you, Jean-Marie? Enough for one who flew? Enough for one who could have everything?" We then cut to a trendy nightclub in Montreal where Jean-Marie, and by the way, that's how you do the accent, where Jean-Marie has unbuttoned her blouse and removed the frill from the neckline, slit her skirt up the sides, and is relishing in the freedom of the outside world.
Sarah, is that what would happen? You just remove the frill and unbutton and slit things?
I love that she's all thatted herself. Like, she didn't need anybody else to do that makeover. Did it herself.
Well, and that's exactly what Jean-Marie and Aurora are to each other, is that Jean-Marie takes off her glasses and whips out her long hair, and she is Aurora. And there we go.
I just love the idea that Jean-Marie and Aurora are their own Freddie Prinze for themselves. Like, that's Freddie Prinze Jr. That's phenomenal. I think, frankly, that guy is enough of a pop culture nerd that he would probably love the idea of that as well.
I think he would be flattered. He probably actually has the Alpha Flight omnibus himself. I have no, evidence to support that, but in my heart, I feel like that's true.
Owning the Alpha Flight omnibus is sort of like a nerd merit badge. Like, you don't just own an Alpha Flight omnibus.
I think it puts us on the list is the thing. So anyway.
I think knowing the age of consent in Quebec is what puts you on the list, actually.
Yeah, well,
And now you know it, so now you're on the list. Welcome, Tom. One of us. Welcome
all the listeners. Really.
Yeah.
You're right.
We've got a little list.
So a thug pulls Jean-Marie into the alley. She defends herself by hitting him with such speed that he didn't see her move. However, that was seen by a conveniently nearby Wolverine, the superhero, not the animal, who looks kind of weird because he's not conventionally attractive or near a conveniently located grove of trees. He's just walking through the city in a cowboy hat.
Question, why a cowboy hat?
Wolverine wears a cowboy hat in the 80s.
I learned something. Thank you. It was not the look for him.
Well, Sarah, since you probably didn't listen to our 3-part series on what if, why not talked about what we need to talk about Alpha Flight, we covered that Wolverine in this era is not the Wolverine that you know from the movies or the cartoon. He is the much closer to the original introduced character before these decades of retcons and stories have been built upon it. And that different character is, like you said, jarringly different when you read it on the screen. You're like, this isn't Hugh Jackman. This guy's so short. What's going on here? I don't want to bone this guy. He's not conventionally attractive.
And yet.
Well, here, let's take this moment to transition over, Sarah, to talk about the art here and talking about conventional attractiveness. Do you have thoughts here? Because Tom and I have talked about John Byrne's art before, and I'm a fan.
I feel like I need to pull up our text exchange from last night as I was reading these episodes. I feel like I need to. Yeah, it's hard not to. I feel like I need to pull up the text I sent to Chris last night as I was reading these issues. And that was to say, basically, why are they all drawn like they're 85 years old, except for the women the artist wants to fuck?
To which I replied, your question contains the answer, my young Padawan.
So I will say one of the things I talk about in my media representation classes that I do is the way women in comic books have been presented over the years. Women are sexual fantasies for the reader. Men are power fantasies for the reader. Like, both bodies are idealized, but women, a lot of times it is, they're standing in those, the Hawkeye Project. Is that something either of you are familiar with?
Oh, yes,
getting
I am.
From Chris. But it's putting Hawkeye into the body positions of women comic book characters. And usually it is both ass and tits facing the viewer, which is not, we have spines, and that doesn't work like that. So I noticed this 80s art, there is a lot of that with the women, which was interesting. I just hadn't, a lot of the things that I'd read included that, but just to see these weeklies like this was really interesting. Anyway, then I had to remind myself that the Golden Girls were also in the 80s, and those women were, older, but they were not crones, and yet in the 80s everybody was a crone. So this was just this, everybody looked like 30 years older than they were.
Well, everybody smoked everywhere.
So truly for a while I was just like, is everybody really old? Are they? I can't tell. So once you see, I think some of the close-up ones, it helped clarify things for me, and then figuring out he's a ski champion and she's this and that, so that helped a lot too. But the art was just, it reminded me of, oh yeah, this is the stuff that people critiqued when they talked about women representation. So that's probably not what you were asking me about with the art.
Prior to the internet, when you were a 13-year-old boy in a household that didn't have cable television, comic books were an amazing resource, and they were very attractive.
God, I did not need to know that.
I beg you, the person who lived in that household with me where we did not have cable, to stop talking, full stop.
I'm sorry. Don't you write books that your mom doesn't want to read because they're too full of sex?
Yeah, not under your roof.
Nice. Okay. We're moving on from this further conversation, and I'm just
won the drumstick this year, Sarah.
You can be quiet. Sarah won that engagement. Take the L. Move on with your day. I did want to circle back, however, to Sarah's point around how the women were drawn, but also and also like with regards to how the men were drawn, because this came up in an earlier episode about how kids are basically done improperly, and the connection I drew a connection to Roman art. But I mean, like, you also see that in sculptural practice where everyone is, when you look at like Michelangelo's David, he is flexing every muscle at once in a way that is physically impossible. Like, there is no counterbalancing to that. And that is certainly true of how a lot of the superheroes are drawn in this time. And also, I would argue why folks like Jim Lee made such a splash when they did, because they actually were showing there's a dynamism to their drawing, because someone might be like throwing a punch, but at the same time, they're not like flexing their abs so hard that you can see the six pack the same way. Like, it looked more natural, even if exaggerated. So, I mean, I just, in terms of like progression of art over the course of comics, I'm just throwing an idea out there. Could be wrong, but kind of made me, one of the things that Sarah's comments made me think about. And I also want to get as far away from that last conversation as we possibly can.
I'm going to chip in on the art here and say what I noticed was that the men are not overly muscled, that there's a very lean look to this that is going to change, in 5 years' time in comic styles.
And maybe that's what jumped out at me, especially because the men aren't, that famous image of Captain America where he's just like, he's one of those Thanksgiving turkeys who's just been injected so you can sell him for the most money in November, the one. And the men weren't like that. They you're right. They are much more reasonably height-wise, muscle-wise, but the women still have the aerodynamic breasts and the midriff-bearing tops and I'm pointing all of the important parts at the viewer at all times. So it was a little, and it's not nearly, I've seen so much worse. I mean, I'm really truly not criticizing Alpha Flight. It was pretty restrained for women, I thought, in a lot of it, in ways that
noticeable, but restrained.
Yes, it was noticeable, but it was certainly not the worst offenders that I've seen by a mile.
It was no Tara, Witch of the Black Rose. Thank you. Oh, Tom, don't give me that puzzled look. If you don't know Tara, Witch of the Black Rose, you can't host a comic book podcast, Tom. It's the biggest butt of all the jokes in comic books ever.
Noted.
That's the haunted vagina panel. Well, that'll be going up in this week's art clips.
Pause while everyone Googles.
So, Wolverine says that his friend, Jimmy Hudson, would like to meet Jean Reno. She replies to Wolverine, "Wolverine, I am up for anything." How was that, Tom? Was that better?
That was much better. Unfortunately, despite trying to get us away from the last part of this conversation, I forgot what was coming up. So
someone's got to ask it. Did they bang? This is pre-X-Men Wolverine, more animal than man, declared an unstable psycho by Department H, as opposed to a stable psycho. I'm just going to go on record and say that I believe that they would absolutely have made macaroni and cheese noises.
And I will go on the record as saying that I fully agree that they had sex. I just do not think it sounded like macaroni and cheese. I don't think that Logan, with all that metal inside of him, can really make that kind of noise during sex. I think it's a lot more clanging.
I think that Jean-Marie is established as a really fast puncher. Like, she punches over and over.
This
and
occurred to me too.
I think with the proper amount of lubrication, it's going to sound like mac and cheese. I'm so sorry, but it is. She's a fast puncher, and he has healing capacity. So
I am so glad to get to do this with you today. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I value your friendship, and I appreciate what you bring to my life. I hope the listeners do as well.
That's a really good point, though, about his healing factor and what that the avenues and doors that opens up.
You know what? Nope. I'm throwing the e-brake on this one, Tom. We're pulling the J-turn and getting right back into the script here. So I would also like to note that, Sarah, the themes that we are tracking through Alpha Flight here are that Alpha Flight has more team-ups, death, sex, and failure than any other superhero team that I have ever read. So normally we tell the listeners to take a drink when we come across one of those themes, but we're going to be skipping the sex drinks this time because none of the sex in this episode is something that we really want to celebrate. However, now that Jean-Marie has teamed up with Wolverine, team up achieved. Take a drink.
This takes us to the backup story in issue number 10, Family Ties. Everything this is the same creative team-wise, so we'll skip those credits from here on out. Narration tells us not very long ago, so we're going to see this happens about a year before the events of X-Men number 120, so maybe 18-ish months before our present in 1984.
Having met Aurora, Heather Hudson comes across a picture of skiing champion Jean-Paul Boubier in the newspaper and realizes that they look exactly alike. So her husband, JMH, uses Department H to look into Jean-Paul's background and puts together the pieces of how the twins got separated. He summons Jean-Paul to Parliament Hill in Ottawa, and as Jean-Paul approaches the Parliament building, he thinks to himself that until very recently, he would only have shown up in this building with a bomb under his arm. So that escalated quickly.
We will be getting a good bit more backstory on Jean-Paul's political beliefs in the very near future.
Do I just not understand Canadian history? Like, is this like Ireland during the Troubles?
A bit, but much more downplayed. Yes.
It's Quebec. Quebec has there have been movements within Quebec for quite some time to, at different points, separate itself from the rest of Canada. I mean, I think the most recent spike on that was like 15 years ago, something like that, where there was a separatist political movement that it never really fully goes anywhere because it doesn't actually work for Quebec to break away for Quebec. But
so that tracks then for him refusing to speak English, for him insisting on French. For my favorite part of all of this, which was when they have assume this is translated from, that this is all in French by now, like footnotes. So that was, all right, that tracks.
As he gets to Parliament Hill, Gary Cody, Alpha Flight's liaison with the government, comes out to greet him. And as Jean-Paul is just rattling off in French, Cody says, yeah, I know that we're all supposed to be bilingual, but I'm really not good at this. Can we do English? And Jean-Paul is just like, I prefer my native language. You're going to have to pay attention. Now, what am I doing here? And that is Jean-Paul. Like, it really is a wonderful sketch. Like, this backup is only like 4 pages or something. It's very short.
I feel like this is the only backstory on him I really got in this.
Yeah.
And I went in cold, and I really had a pretty good sense of the isolation, the ski champion who's not super interested in like taking advantage of his fame with women or anything like that. And
we'll get to that.
thinking I could have brought a bomb, but instead I'm just going to make you speak French to me. It really well sketched out with very little space on the page, I thought.
So JMH introduces Jean-Paul and Jean-Marie, and off we go. One of the things that I really like is that at the last panel of this story is the two twins reaching out to shake hands for the first time, because if you remember, their powers are such that when they touch each other, a overwhelming light flash happens, and they can use that to disorient their enemies. And I always wondered, like, if they were growing up together, like, did you just high five one day and suddenly it looked like a flashbang went off in your house? And so this establishes that nobody knew that. And the narration there says that there's a big surprise that happens just after this panel, but we don't actually see it. And I kind of liked that storytelling bit.
Yeah, it's a very well constructed introduction to some of Jean Paul's background, reinforces what we already know about him. After all, we are in issue 10 is where this backup appears, if I remember correctly. I just said it, so I should remember it correctly, but whatever. We have a sense of who Northstar is and how he behaves, and this reinforces it, but also kind of gives the refusing to speak English, the surprise and warmth that he expresses at discovering he has a twin sister. It really does add some layers to a guy who, up to this point, we have mostly celebrated and denigrated for having his go-to move being to punch someone in the back of the head really fast.
Quick question about that. Is that in a fight, or is it when he spots somebody he doesn't like just going down the street getting his dry cleaning?
Okay, so to be clear, the answer is yes. To be clear, we have so far only seen it within the context of fights where he popped Cyclops in the back of the head, that sort of thing.
But that only makes sense. The man has eye beams. You don't punch him in the front of the face.
Totally tracks. However, knowing Jean Paul the way we now do, and knowing that he has super speed that people can't really register, I 100% believe that he sees someone who's walking down the street who's wearing how dare they wear that belt buckle? And he just slaps the shit out of them. And they don't know what happened, but they get the overwhelming sense that they did something wrong and God is punishing them. So...
Sarah, we decided that Jean Paul practices the ancient martial art known as fuck you.
Fuck you. It's mostly cursing a lot and kicking people while they're down.
I looked it up today to make sure I got the quote right. It's a lot of headbutting and kicking people while they're down.
I knew that was wrong.
But what's really funny is that you just said it the exact same way Chris has said it every single time. So apparently within the Baker household, that's what they...
listeners, that comes from the movie So I Married an Axe Murderer starring Michael Myers, which is one of the greatest cinematic achievements of the mid-90s.
And it is the lingua franca of the Baker household.
Yes, at one point in time, my mother bought 3 identical copies of the VHS tape to give each of us for Christmas, and she said the person at the store that she was buying them from just looked at her.
This also tracks, though, why you and I get along so well, Chris, because we watched that a lot in my household. And when I first started letting my hair grow longer in high school, they started referring to me as Head. So, yeah. Head, pants, yeah.
I'm just going to stick a plug here. Excelsior Embroidery does sell some nice wall hangings involving the dad from So I Married an Axe Murderer saying some sayings. So I'll be sure to include those links in the show notes.
This is turning into a 90s movie podcast, FYI.
It's always been on that knife's edge, and you're what's pushing us over, Sarah.
Sorry.
Frankly.
Alpha Flight number 7, titled The Importance of Being Deadly, and number 8, titled Cold Hands, Cold Heart, with the same creative team as before. There are remarkably few creators involved in making Alpha Flight, and even when Byrne leaves after issue 29, because he's writing and drawing these issues, the next writer will be with the book until issue number 66. But the artists change frequently over the course of that, including Jim Lee.
A fun fact. In this issue, the twins have no impact on the overall story and would have played out the same way without their involvement, which seems like a very strange thing to say about a superhero comic, but literally, if you remove the twins from this larger storyline, it kind of goes the same way for the most part. So we do get more characterization, we get some tension, we get a whole lot of things actually happen with regards to the twins. But as far as the actual plot is concerned, they're kind of bystanders, which I don't know, kind of fits with some of the other, the larger ethos of Alpha Flight as we've been kind of digging into it so far.
This story arc is Alphans of the Lost Ark with a K, not a C. Tom's shaking his head at me, but Sarah's shaking her head at me. Your boos mean nothing.
I had a question. Were the writer or artist involved Canadian? Because
Yes.
Okay, because this read like a tourist manual when they talk about the quaint side streets of Canada's largest city, and I was like, are they trying to get us to spend our vacation in Quebec?
The entire series is a love, not even a love letter. Is here's a thought. Maybe the Canadian government of our world was actually underwriting Alpha Flight as a tourist guide to it. Look at Canada. Come to Winnipeg and go to the Stampede. Hey, check out Ottawa. Hey, Quebec. It's we cover the entire freaking country, and it's nothing but how wonderful is it to live in Canada? By the way, our government really terrifying, but great place to live.
The CIA infiltrated newspapers. They tried to infiltrate colleges back in the day. Canada, they just brought you comic books. That's how they did it. It's the difference between our countries.
So who's the greater monster, the CIA or Canada?
I feel like if we answer, we'll all be black bagged, so we'll just leave it.
Yeah, Canada will send superheroes into the United States and invade in order to take us back to Canada. They've done it several times, and we're on issue 7.
They will punch us in the back of the head when we least expected, and that's that.
Yeah, on this video call, all of a sudden, we watch as one by one our heads loll forward and hit the desk, our desks uncomfortably, and it's like, well, I guess it's my turn. Oh!
In their civilian guises, Jean-Marie meets Jean-Paul's dear old friend Raymond, who is killed by local land developer / thug boss Deadly Ernest, who is subsequently killed by his nemesis, conveniently named Nemesis. And so there's our first death in a while, so take a drink. So that is literally the entire story of these 2 issues, and yet each one of these elements is greater than the summary makes them out. So let's start by talking about Raymond.
This is a quote from the comic. Until Northstar found Aurora, Raymond Belmont had been the most important person in his life. More than a father, much more than a friend. He had found Jean-Paul scarcely more than a boy, alone and frightened. Frightened of what he thought he was and what he feared he might become. And Raymond had led him out of that dark fear into the bright, clear light of self-acceptance, teaching him not to fear his mutant powers or any other thing. An iron door has closed upon a chapter of his life, and Jean-Paul Bobier is alone again. This quote obviously taking place after Raymond is killed. But there's a few things to get into there, I think.
As Raymond and Aurora are getting to know each other, a new character enters the scene, and that is Raymond's daughter, Danielle. Much to Northstar's surprise, Northstar says, Raymond, this is your daughter, but how? I mean, you never told me of a daughter. And Raymond says, she is a treasured reminder of the very different man I once was. Whew. All right, there's a lot here. We're building up to it. We're just going to get all... So, Sarah, are all gays homeless boys found by older men and groomed into a lifestyle of sin and shame? Because Northstar is clearly presented as a homeless boy who was groomed into a lifestyle of sin and shame.
It is Marvel. It is DC. It is widespread. It is widespread. Okay. I think this is why you asked me. All right. Just to warn everybody, my dissertation for my PhD was on representations of queer relationships in primetime television. So I did a lot of research on the history of that. So to me, this is pretty clearly queer-coded dialogue, relationship, interactions. You know, it's pretty obvious to me. You have a daughter. That reaction is not somebody who is looking at a father figure. It could be, I guess, but the way it's written is a reminder of a man I used to be. It's all there. So there are 4 stages of media representation, generally in any underrepresented group in media. The first is annihilation. You just don't see that group at all. And I'm talking about race. I'm talking about sexuality, you know, all kinds of different
Leave
depictions.
It to Beaver.
Yeah. Yeah. If you would not have been on Leave It to Beaver, this is how you moved it to media. Nothing. You're just annihilation. You're not there. You don't exist, which is dehumanizing. Then you move into the ridicule stage. It's just flamboyant, over the top stereotypes. It's the lowest hanging fruit, or it's guest stars. You see them once and they're gone. It's victims. It's villains. They're the bad guy. They're either the bad guy or they're dead.
Would MASH count as the first one with Klinger as a figure of ridicule?
MASH is not usually mentioned in the literature, but
Okay.
I'm sure.
I'm just trying to nail down a couple of examples so that we can all kind of...
Please, I have those. Come on. So this is a lot of this research was pioneered with Black characters, but certainly with queer characters as well. You're going to see this. So after you get the ridicule guest star stuff, you get into regulation. And this is where there's a good example of this type of person. They are the police captains. They are the school superintendents. You know, they're in positions of authority. They're good. They're law abiding. They're lawful good, right?
One of the good ones.
Yeah, exactly. And then the final stage is acceptance. You get to be anything. You know, you can be the lead, you can be the good guy, the bad guy. It's not the thing about your character. It is just a thing about your character. And so for TV, one of the first real depictions of a gay character in television was Billy Crystal in the 1970s on the show Soap. In the late 1980s, 30-something, the TV show showed two gay men in bed together, not doing anything sexual. They were just in bed together. And that was revolutionary for the late 80s. Ellen came out on her titular show in 1997. That was huge too. So we're starting to see more accepted depictions in TV in the 70s, late 80s, but we're still pretty rigid about what we can show. So prior to that, and even during those times, you just have so much queer coding where you can read it. If you want to see that it's there, you will. And if you are not aware that those people exist, which was the case for a lot of people, they just didn't know anybody and they wouldn't have seen it or read it that way. You can watch Xena as just an action show with two gal pals being gal pals. Or you can watch Xena the way you should be watching Xena, right? So to me, this read very much as we are coding this. So if you want to see it, you can, but we're not going to offend or alienate people who in the 80s are not ready for this, don't want to see it. So it's there if you want it to be. You all tell me, but that's the X-Men, right? The X-Men mutant powers are allegories for a lot of this stuff. So it's not that surprising to see it here too, I don't think.
The mutant metaphor can be taken for just about anything you want it to be taken for. So whether it's generally civil rights is the best way to say it, but most people think race about that. But that also applies to sexuality. It applies to disabilities, because I have come around to the idea that the best way to think of the mutant metaphor is as a disability metaphor. And it has been very interesting getting to know that, because I grew up very much in the race-based construct and then into the 90s of the sexuality construct that this is playing on. So this is again happening in 1984, I believe we're at. And so we're still covered by the Comics Code Authority. And the Comics Code Authority had explicit rules that homosexuals are not allowed to be portrayed, I believe, unless they die. Like, I think you could show a gay character, but only if they got whacked, not whacked off before the end of the issue.
That is very much in keeping with television and movies also. There's a trope called bury your gays. Autostraddle is a website that is really focused on lesbian content, and they did a count of the number of dead lesbians on television. The number of lesbian characters who lived to see a happy ending over several spans of years was like a fraction of a percent. Lesbians die in TV. It is wild the way still in this century we are seeing that and doing that. So yeah, you've got the Comics Code Authority, you've got the Hays Code, which was for motion pictures. So you just have this history of, we know how to write this, so it's there, but the way the audience interprets it is up to them. And so I think there's just this rich history of that, and I say rich, I mean, it's not great, but it's what we had. So
I'm hearing Norm Macdonald saying, "So many dead lesbians!" Like,
pretty much, yeah.
90s movie podcast. That's what we're gonna do here today.
Chris, I haven't looked into this. It's not research I've done, but given how Northstar is written, how clearly this strikes me as consciously coded. So I'm wondering if you've looked into Byrne's politics at all. You know, has he done this in any of his other comics? Was there a particular reason that he chose to write Northstar as gay, and then, obviously deployed all the tactics that we've been discussing to allow it to fly under the radar of the censors?
I haven't done anything specific about this, but I can say that John Byrne is known to be very conservative in terms of his political affiliations. We're talking about the mid-'80s, Reagan Republicanism, Margaret Thatcher going on. Like, the guys who write Batman aren't all anti-gun either. You've got big NRA members who write Batman saying words like, "We're not going to use guns. Guns are for cowards," because they're writing stories for kids and they don't give a fucking shit. You know what I mean? Like, they don't think that they're shaping people's ideas about this. But then when those kids grow up and they think we don't need to use guns. Guns are for cowards. They're like, "Who gave you these ideas?" Thanks, Marv Wolfman. Moving on.
And political parties change too. I think Republicans in the 80s are very different from Republicans today.
And different from Republicans in the 1880s. Like, you can't really just, you know what? This isn't a politics podcast, but I agree that John Byrne is bringing more types of things into the view here, and I think it's great. He wanted Northstar to be full on out and make him gay from the get-go. And I think that, he has coming off the X-Men with Chris Claremont, and Chris Claremont wrote them gay coded all to hell. Like, Sarah, if you haven't come across the gay coding in X-Men, you're in for some fun if you poke around with it.
Well, here's where, again, I say it's more movies for me, but the young Magneto and Charles Xavier, I mean, when you cast Michael Fassbender and Mr. Tumnus, is going to happen. And what's interesting is I think you can be a little bit more overt with it in more recent movies, right? You don't have to code it as much. It's like Interview with the Vampire, right? It's very deeply coded in the book in the 1970s. The TV adaptation that's on right now, hella gay. We just don't have to.
I did not know there was a TV adaptation.
It's so good.
Yeah, I've seen some bits from it, and it looks phenomenal.
I know that the Valiant issues of the Vampire Lestat that are fully painted and use direct quotes from the book for all their dialogue, those comics are fantastic. But I don't know about the current TV show, but I remember this comic book from 20 years ago.
This is addressed to the person who's biologically related to me. I recapped the first season of Interview with the Vampire for Entertainment Weekly, so I wrote about it in depth every week, and you just don't follow my work. It's fine. It's cool. It's fine. It's cool. It's fine.
I don't follow anyone's work, Sarah. I mean, I'm doing a podcast about Alpha Flight. Do I look like the kind of guy who has his finger firmly on the pulse of society?
What I would say is, I know I talked a lot about the TV representation, and we're talking about comic books here, but I really do think TV is our curriculum. It's our national curriculum, right? It's even if you don't watch it, you swim in the culture that does. And so as goes society, so goes TV, and vice versa. So I think the way characters are evolving there reflects the way they're going to be depicted in comics, reflects the prevailing national attitude. So that's why it doesn't surprise me to see this level of wink wink to the relationship in the 80s, because that's kind of where we were on TV. It's where we were if you look at audience attitude polls and things like that. So none of this shocked me, and it was again fun to see this snapshot in time in the wild, week to week. How are we dealing with it?
And I'm imagining Jim Shooter looking at these pages and just thinking to himself, God damn it, John. There's nothing in here that I can make you take out, but we all know what you're doing, John. Straighten up, get it right, or pay the price. And it will actually be another 100 issues officially, 99 issues until Northstar officially comes out in Alpha Flight number 106.
What year was that?
92, 3.
That's earlier than I would have thought, honestly. We were like canceling, for better or for worse, the comic strip from daily newspapers then because a character came out. So good for them.
Yeah, and I remember buying that issue from the newsstand in Lincoln at Metropolis Comics from Bearded Paul. Pour one out for Paul.
So why did Northstar, officially, clearly come out then? I mean, was there something they're trying to tie into? Is there a particular reason why, after all this time, they went that route?
I think largely Alpha Flight did end with, I think it's 130 is the last issue. So it's like circling the drain area there. But it was a way to get, hey, we've got this character. He's been gay the whole time. We've all known he's been gay the whole time. This is no like, a lot of people felt like when Iceman came out, that was just Marvel saying, hey, Iceman's gay now. Deal with it. Sunglasses come down, But no, when you're an Iceman fan and you go back and you read it, you see where these codings were coming in, and it was just not nearly as heavy or as consistent as with Northstar. But I read a page of Iceman from like 1996 where he's coming out to his dad. He just like here, where they shifted over from they're talking all this gay shit and then mutant power. That's what we're talking. Wink, wink. That's exactly how it was handled with Iceman, and it was very cool. And that's the source of the scene in X-Men 2 when his mom turns to him and says, "Have you tried not being a mutant?"
Can I say really quickly, there also is a difference between. All right, I'll stop. There also is a difference between queer coding and queer baiting, and this is not doing that, which I really appreciate also. But I'm sure most people know this, but queer baiting is winking at a relationship between two characters, but never. I don't want to say consummating because I don't mean it physically necessarily, but yeah, physically also, but never confirming it and never making it canon because you don't want to alienate people. And the biggest example of that I can think of is from the TV show Supernatural with Dean and Castiel. It is so clearly there, and it is so I can read it this way. The fans are hungry for it, certain fans, but we're never going to do it because other fans would be horrified by the way it changes the character, it changes the comic, it changes the source material. So this was not queer baiting to me. It's just coding, but there is a way to do it that is, I think, exploitive. And I didn't see that here. I just saw, if you want to see it, it's 1987 where you're reading this. It's there. And if not, enjoy your very straight comic book.
Totally straight. All right. So the next main topic of this issue would be the villain, Deadly Ernest himself. His real name is Ernest St. Ives. He is a dark-haired white dude in a purple pinstripe suit and an orange tie, so you clearly know that he gives no fucks. Nothing other is particularly special about him visually. He villain-splains to Jean-Marie while he has her captive that he was a soldier in World War I who experienced all the bad things that could happen to a soldier in that war. While he was dying of mustard gas, he saw the face of death herself and rejected her with such force that he found himself still alive. But his touch will kill anything alive.
Probably took him a couple of unfortunate interactions before he figured that one out, huh?
He's like Rogue on the hardest game setting.
Touch-based powers are just, kind of the worst. We also meet Nemesis. This is a female-presenting, costumed adventurer type. Has sort of a vigilante feel to the look. The costume is vertically split, kind of like Guardian's costume. Black on the outside, red on the inside. It has a full red and black head mask with big white eyes, like a lot like Spider-Man or Deadpool. It's kind of bland and at the same and minimal, but at the same time like a lot all at once.
Yeah, but my favorite part is the Doctor Strange style cape with the enormous collar for zero reason. It's just there. So she also carries with her a sword, which she says is scarcely an atom's width thick, and it can cut through anything. So it's like a giant Wolverine claw sword.
She finds Northstar in Ernest's mansion and brings him along while she cuts a bloody swath through the guards. Team up achieved. Take a drink.
As she faces off with Ernest, at the end we find out that she is Deadly Ernest's daughter. She quickly uses said blade on Deadly Ernest to cut him neatly into 6 pieces. Another death. Take a drink. I told you there's lots of death, sex, team-ups, and failures in this book.
Apparently Nemesis killed literally all of Ernest's guys in the building, but that was off panel, so we don't count those. And plus, we've already done like 3 or 4 drinks in this episode, and we don't want to hurt you.
Drink responsibly, people.
I'm curious about that. Again, coming at this from primarily a TV movie viewer, there are times when shows just don't show you that to save budget, right? Game of Thrones famously skipped big battles. Preacher, the adaptation of Preacher, did some very clever off-screen fights, so you didn't have to spend a lot of money on those effects. Are they trying to save money? Panels, space? Do they want to?
Panels.
Is it panels?
Yes,
and
panels and space.
did they have like ratings? They were trying to, not ratings, but were they trying to not be so violent and bloody? It just was interesting that they were like, you should have seen this fight.
Yeah, there was not much violence in this story at all. It was just a couple of punches here and there, although people die. But no, it would be saving panels, saving pages. The way that these are structured here with the A story and then the backup story, there is a very hard limit on how many pages you get to tell your story in. And comics wouldn't vary in length. You got your 24 pages and that's what you got. And if you're using 6 of them to tell this story, you got 18 pages. What is worth on here? And I don't think that Nemesis doing all this stuff, if there was more for her to explain, it would give her that opportunity for exposition. But yeah, Wolverine does a lot of killing off panel too.
Comic books are the perfect show don't tell medium, which you can do in a way that you really can't, in book form. But so it's interesting to me that they told it, not in a bad way. I think they really did it well each time they did it. Thank you, listeners, for letting someone get comics explained to them.
John Byrne is very good at this pacing where we're getting the story, we're getting all the information, we're getting all the characterization. He's not great at plot. His decision about what happens is not always as good as who it's happening to. But I'm glad to see that you're picking up this rhythm here, and there's a lot of cool visual stuff that he does in other issues and other arcs that we've already covered. So I'll take this opportunity to offer you and all the listeners, just to remind you, read the first 12 issues of Alpha Flight, and you will not regret it. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Northstar rips off Nemesis's mask, and while we don't see what's underneath, we do see some ginger hair on her head from behind, a narration that tells us it is, quote, the face of one who carries upon her shoulders the anguish of the world, and the terrible, lifeless eyes burn into his very soul, end quote. Which is fine. I mean, it's
mysterious. Yeah, this is not the last time we will see either Nemesis or Ernest St. Ives. They will both be reappearing.
I thought it was Danielle. I'm stupid. I was just like, oh, it's Danielle. It's clearly Danielle. Come on.
Oh, yeah, that was the point. There was a mystery strung through the issue here. Was Nemesis the daughter of Raymond, who is seeking vengeance for her father? But Byrne pulls this bait and switch. Like I said, like, he's good at pacing and stuff, but the plot itself, you're just like, oh, okay, this character, he has a daughter. Okay, great.
Well, and then what Chris is alluding to is that at the end of the issue, we discovered that the daughter was actually working with Ernest and stood up her father. Not the best family relationship there, it seems.
Was she actually his daughter? Because my impression was that she was not actually his daughter, and that Ernest coordinated this whole thing so that when he killed Raymond, this person would inherit and sell him the place.
They did make a point of saying that they had never met in person. Ernest and Danielle had never met in person, so she could have been anybody. And again, we didn't have the internet to, check her socials. So.
Issue 7 starts with Northstar taking Aurora to see a psychiatrist in Montreal. This is what they do before they go see Raymond. And the psychiatrist trip is interesting because they can't talk about being superheroes. And Northstar is trying to get Aurora some help with her clearly split personality problem. But, when Aurora, or it's Jean-Marie that walks in there, Jean-Marie doesn't want to talk about her problems. Aurora doesn't think she has a problem. So how do you get a loved one mental health when you know that they're going to be lying to their doctor? And like that tension and discomfort between Northstar and Aurora, compounded by the fact that they've only known each other for less than 2 years. Like it was a very compact and efficient way of putting together some very real feelings for grown-ups who are watching this, who have dealt with some of this grown-up stuff. I think I've said both to you separately. I really like how John Byrne does trashy soap opera very well, because Alpha Flight is a great trashy soap opera. And it's something different that I'm catching from it when I'm reading it here as an adult than when I was a 12-year-old kid and I read this and I was like, oh, his old friend died. He must be really mad. I bet we're going to go kick some butt. So I really appreciate these. Back to the story. Jean-Marie, again, she's all that's herself into Aurora, stops a mugger guy. She ends up playing undercover with Deadly Ernest when he mistakes her for Raymond's daughter, and she seems to be good at that undercover role. In this situation, Northstar is suspecting that she has turned on him because that's what life has prepared him for, that people are going to let him down and leave him alone and not stand by his side. And Aurora lied to whoever was in front of her to get through the day safely because that is what life prepared her for. And I think it was a really good way of showing how their experiences leading up to this and the way that they want to play this superhero caper where they're stuck in it, their instincts are very different and they don't work well together. As a matter of fact, this is going to cause a status quo change for Northstar and Aurora. Because as they fly away from their adventure and they're going over their events, Northstar says, oh, no, Tom, I got to hand you up. I'm sorry. I'm going to let Tom do this.
As Northstar and Aurora fly away from their adventure, Northstar says, well, frankly, dear sister, given the strange taste of our Aurora persona, I assumed you romanced yourself to safety. She replies, you mean you thought I? With Ernest St. Ives? Northstar, why not? Hey, thanks for the plug, bud. Why not? After your fling with Sasquatch, I'm prepared to believe you're capable of anything. Aurora, I don't believe it. You dare. You, of all people, dare pass judgment on my love life. And she tells him that their partnership has ended. And as she flies off, the story ends with Northstar quietly saying, "Don't leave me. I'll be all alone."
Tom's delivery aside, it was a nice echo to end the issue, because it echoes in the beginning of the first one where he felt all alone. He's accustomed to and hates being alone.
It's given weird vibes. We agree, right? The vibes are weird.
Their partnership. They call it a partnership over and over in multiple issues, our special partnership. And
so in true academic form, I went and I did some research, mostly at the website tvtropes.com. You know, what else do you need?
Do not Google that. You all have jobs.
You'll lose.
You have chores. You have things to do. Do not Google TV tropes.
Accurate. This is actually really common. There are canonical relationships where you touch and it makes a big light. I'm talking about Jaime and Cersei Lannister. I'm talking about Dexter and Deborah Morgan on Dexter. I'm talking, we have those. We also have really popular incest ships and things like that. I mentioned Dean and Castiel from Supernatural. Sam and Dean are brothers, and that's a huge, huge popular incest ship. It happens. Okay. I think there are 3 reasons that this is going on in this comic book. Number 1, this is supposed to be a platonic sibling relationship, and the author just isn't good enough to write it. He was not able to show sibling affection, and it came off weird. Number 2, it was a simpler time, and how he was writing it in 1987, people weren't going to jump to that. They just weren't quite as broken by the internet and the extra 30 years of pop culture that came along. Or number 3, it's intentional. I don't think it's intentional. Northstar is going to come out, right, in like 10 years. If they were intentionally writing an incest storyline, they would have leaned into it harder, I think. Otherwise, why are you incest coding? Why would you do that? There's no So I think it was just trying to write platonic writing, and it just got out of hand. On the other hand, when their partnership severs, she goes back to Sasquatch, right? So she goes back to an ex-boyfriend.
Well, she hasn't broken up with Sasquatch. He was trying to imply that that wasn't an ongoing thing by calling it a fling, but no, she calls him my dear Walter. And
it just felt a little bit like, I'm done with this man, my brother, and I'm back with you, buddy. Whip out that.
Well, that's very much
pouch.
How she does engage in her fur pouch.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. So what I would bring to this is, I think part of the reason you could read it that way, and part of the reason I almost felt like it could have been slightly intentional, and I'm going to bust out the best research you're going to hear on this podcast.
Ever.
And that is a live journal post from the year 2007 by someone named Setesima, who is talking about the Sam and Dean Winchester supernatural. It's the Wincest ship. It's the Winchester. It's terrible. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. They are 2 brothers who were raised by a demon hunting dad, and they lived apart for a while, but they really only have each other. Their dad was shit. Their mom is dead. So what this entry says, and it just clanged with me for Aurora and Northstar. This is a quote. Here's the thing about Sam and Dean. The reason I think it's believable. They don't have a normal sibling relationship. They themselves are both completely dysfunctional in so many ways. I think they're both tremendously lonely. And here's the thing. They're totally fucking codependent. So basically, neither of them can have romantic relationships with other people. They've been wrapped up in the other their entire lives. They're both kind of in desperate need of someone to really love them openly and completely and without reservations. So that's why this author is saying that incest works with the Winchesters. But I think if you read it that way, for these 2, they just want somebody to love them. They just, they haven't even had themselves. They've just found each other. I can kind of see where that passion and that characterization can be read in a different way, but because of their brokenness, it really does work with the sibling dynamic in some ways, I think. I don't know. It is, the vibes are weird, and I'm just trying to find a way to explain how, with characterization, that might have happened.
That's an official tagline now. Alpha Flight. The vibes are weird.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point that maybe the writing wasn't quite good enough, especially when he's trying to juggle this idea of this shift between the Jean-Marie and the Aurora persona, which is its own,
Yeah, I do feel like we haven't given that quite as much of attention. The starkness of this split personality and how that's not how science works.
Right. I mean, so like you've already got that you're dealing with, and you're trying to like set up this idea of like her being, interested in sex in some regards, but also, I mean, so like he's walking a lot of different lines, and then you also have this dynamic, as you're pointing out, that this is the first time they've had someone else who is supposed to be part of their life and is supposed to be the closest person to them, and that they can actually open up to about all the things that have happened to them up to this point. So it's just the balancing act just kind of skews a little too far into a unpleasant interpretation. But yeah.
Well, and the other thing I would say is I hate to come for the writing. That feels mean, but they are also, I think, indicating that this is translated from the French, right? And so these conversations are going to be in French. And so the dialogue is clunky because it is a translation. So I think there's also intentionally trying to make it sound a little different because they're speaking French and we're translating it. Am I giving way too much benefit of the doubt there?
Yes.
You're being extremely generous, but you are making a good point, and I think I'm going to adopt that point and try to be generous and say it's a translation issue. You know how the French
it's a translation from Canadians. Like they're all talking Canadian, so like we're.
Isn't there an Arrested Development joke about French movies about cousins having sex?
Sounds right. I mean, they're well, yes, because maybe and George Michael always have that. So there is Arrested Development. When I was looking up,
talk about incest.
When I was looking up examples of pop culture incest, which I did in incognito mode on my phone, because Arrested Development was on my. I snapped it and I ran my car over it, and I took the SIM card. Like
wise.
But I was kind of interesting to see all the comic examples where you can read this as well. Pietro and Wanda was the big one that I saw in DC. Superman and Supergirl had a whole history that I didn't know about. Ugh.
Supergirl and her horse have a history you probably don't know about. Watching your face fall was glorious. This whole episode was worth it just to watch your smile crumble.
Supergirl. What did she do to her horse?
She didn't do. The horse was in love with her.
Well, I'm so sorry to Supergirl. I don't know why I just made her the perpetrator there. Wow. Supergirl is sunshine and light. I'm a monster.
Let's not deny the horse its agency in the relationship, eh?
This is taking a turn.
There you go. There's the episode title. Horses have agency too.
I'm sorry that I brought an end to your partnership. I don't mean partnership like Aurora and Northstar.
Well, I don't know what I was expecting. I'm not sure if I have anything else to add to. Tell you what, the last thought that I think I have on this topic is going to be that there's a lot of this. There it goes again. There's a lot of these issues that are subtextual and that we're kind of reading in, and that we're taking more from this story than what is actually being presented to us. And it's kind of hard to know when you need to stop and start looking just at the text, and moving back and forth like that matters. So maybe Byrne just worked real hard on getting all this this gay coded, crazy coded stuff, and then he just done played himself because it ended up splashing over in ways he didn't expect.
I would say sometimes a pipe is just a pipe, right? There is feel free to cut this.
And sometimes this is not a pipe.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So there's a comm theory, and if this gets too college professor, please cut it. But there's a comm theory called uses and gratifications, which is that we use media to gratify certain needs and desires that we have, and we do it consciously and subconsciously. We consume news because we have the need for surveillance or control or prediction about what's going to happen. You can read a comic book just based on the words and images on the page, and you can enjoy it and love it, and that is all you need from it. Or you can read it to get messages about how we live today, or what is being a mutant, and how does that relate to my world and how I interact because I have a disability, because I am not straight, because I am whatever the case may be. Horror movies are another great example. You can just watch a horror movie to be horror, but there's so much allegory in horror, and it's, for me, so much more fun to pick that apart. What are we critiquing? What are we really afraid of here? So I think it's fantastic that you can read it the way you want to read it. your uses and gratifications might be different than mine. You can take the same piece of media and come away with completely different interpretations. And I love that. That's why I do what I do. And it's why this was so fun for me to talk about, because it's just twins touching fists, making big light explosions, or maybe it's something else. So that's the power of media. That's it. The end.
So my final thought here that I wanted to ask you folks is, okay, so this title of the story is The Importance of Being Earnest. And I know that the title is a play on this issue's villain named Deadly Ernest, and that there is a stage play named The Importance of Being Earnest. But everything I know about that play is that Mary Jane was starring in it in Spider-Man 2. You people are literary. Is there like an Easter egg here, or is it just atrocious wordplay?
It's by Oscar fucking Wilde. So all things considered, yes, quite a loaded title.
Well, and the other thing about that is, in London at the time that Oscar Wilde was writing the play, earnest was slang for gay. So this is a hella gay play. There also is a quote from the play that says, "To lose one parent, Mr. Worthing, may be regarded as a misfortune. To lose both looks like carelessness." And I thought that was interesting with Jean Paul's, because his parents died and then his foster family dies.
His mom's cousins were they said. So I guess anyway, they died.
It's a lot of dead parents, and it looks like carelessness. So that is a funny extra layer for Ernest. But what were they just doing, the low hanging fruit of Ernest, or was it intended to be more?
I thought it was clever. Yeah, I really feel like with what context you've provided here, this feels like a much cleverer title for the type of story that was being told here. It feels a lot like John Byrne handed this to Jim Shooter just to watch Jim Shooter look at him and say, "God damn it, John."
And who hasn't done that to a boss at some point, or wanted to do that to a boss at some point?
We came for the man's writing earlier. Let's give him credit for layering it with Oscar Wilde allegory.
So that brings us more than halfway through the arc leading up to pivotal issue number 12. Next issue, we'll be looking at the origin of Snowbird, and our friend secret agent linebacker superhero Dr. Walter Langowski gets asked if everything gets bigger when he turns into Sasquatch. Thank you again to this week's special guest, Sara Netzley. Sara, where can listeners who found you enchanting today find your work and follow you?
I am on socials under my name. There are not a lot of Sara Netzleys out there. That's Sara with no H, Netzley. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I shouldn't be. I'm on Threads. I'm on Facebook. I write for Entertainment Weekly on a freelance basis. You can find my stuff there. I also write romance as Sarah Whitney. So I don't know what the Venn diagram of your listeners and romance readers are, but there you go. So that is where I am.
After this story arc, I bet there's going to be more than we expected, actually.
I'm excited to find out.
Well, I enjoyed this. Thank you so much for the invitation. This was a lot of fun.
This was a lot of fun. And my last question I wanted to ask you was, what's your take on Alpha Flight after having done this? Because a lot of people have heard jokes about Alpha Flight or seen them in something or other and think it's just the butt of a joke. Now that you've actually engaged in a serious way, what do you think?
I mean, I'm going to answer your question with a question. You mentioned the pivotal issue 12. Could you send me that so I can read it?
I got you, fam.
I'm kind of in it now. I feel like I talked about the things I liked already. Just the sort of underwritten storytelling in a good way, the interesting art. I read the full issues as opposed to just these Aurora and Northstar sections, and it was a little chaotic the way it bounces from story to story, but it was kind of fun to have a different experience with different people, and I kind of dug it. I don't know anything about it. The cameos, the Steve Rogers popping up, the Wolverine suddenly is there. It was just kind of fun to be like, I was the Leonardo DiCaprio meme, pointing.
Well, that takes us to this week's Alpha Flight patch. Excelsior Embroidery Company is producing a series of custom patches for Why Not based on what we're covering, and this week we see the Sasquatch face patch. I'm going to show you guys so that you can ooh and ah and make people want to come, see it. So we're going to put pictures of that with the art clips for this episode. You can visit the whynotpod.com blog to see it and find links to all things Why Not around the web. Leave a comment on the blog. We'd love to try to answer your Alpha Flight questions. And check out ExcelsierEmbroidery.etsy.com for all your embroidered comic nerd needs, like patches, towels, battle vests, and anything else soft enough to hoop. If you want to see some of these patches we've been talking about, the Excelsior Embroidery Company will be vending at the Geek Craft Expo St. Louis, July 27th and 28th at Webster University. GCE is a great event I've exhibited at for years in St. Louis, Minneapolis, Indianapolis, and this year I'm going to Madison on August 24th and 25th. GCE is always a lot of fun. Come support your local nerd crafters and find something you won't see anywhere else. For more info, you can follow Excelsior Embroidery on Instagram or Etsy, and geekcraftexpo.com, or on Instagram as geekcraftexpo. If you come out to see me, mention the podcast and I'll have something special for you. Plus, you'll get to see my super cool Marvel Battle Vest. Hope to see you there.
This episode of Why Not is recorded in Chicago, Illinois, Peoria, Illinois, and deep beneath stately Baker Manor in a fashionable neighborhood outside St. Louis. It is produced by me, Tom Flynn, with help from Chris Baker. We want to thank once again our special guest, Sara Netzley, for the jokes, the information, and everything in between. New episodes are available every other week on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and your preferred podcatching app. If you like what you hear, please rate and review us on your podcast provider. Those are really important to helping fellow fans find our show.
Until next time. Jean-Marie's having some changes to her body these days, Tom.
I need you to. Okay, that's a great line. I need you to say it again after you clear your throat, because with a little bit of rasp in there, I'm looking out for you.
A little too Jean Reno in The Professional.
A little too Jean Reno in The Professional.
Is that the code for "you've gone too far"?
No, that's the code. That's the code for they edited the movie to the French version of the movie clearly establishes that
Absolutely are fucking in that movie.
He absolutely does. And the US version excises that it's like a very brief scene of her like pulling up her boxer shorts, his boxer shorts. And
on her.
Yeah. So anyway, we've been using that as a basically like, you know, kid fucking.
Yeah, it was Jean Reno and Gary Oldman who kept the movie from being straight up that, because Luc Besson totally married his pregnant 16-year-old girlfriend a year after that. Anyway, it really takes away from the movie, but the movie's powerful. It's a good movie. Moving on, because this is an Alpha Flight podcast, not a late 90s movies podcast. Which Tom and I are also qualified to do.
I was going to say, I could take it in that direction any day.
All right, I'm going to start over from the taking out the rasp.
Oh, fuck. Sara, you haven't heard his voice. That's his Sasquatch voice. We've decided that Sasquatch actually has a high-pitched, like, just absurd.
It's a pity.
What has my life become? All right. Go for it.